The Politics of Starvation. A few days ago, I received a wad of literature from the Save Europe Now committee, which has been attempting, without much encouragement from the government or help from the press, to increase the supply of food from this country to Europe. They quote a series of statements from authoritative sources, which I will come back to in a moment, and which go to show that whereas we are the reasonably well off, and the United States is enjoying an orgy of overeating, a good part of Europe is lapsing into brute starvation. In the Observer of January 13, however, I have just read a signed article by Air Chief Marshal Sir Philip Joubert expressing the contrary opinion. To one returning from overseas in this 7th winter of war, writes Sir Philip, the appearance of the British people is tragic. They seem morose, lacking in spring, and laughter comes with difficulty. The children look pallid and suety, fat but not fit. They compare very ill with the rosy-cheeked youngsters of Denmark, who have all the meat and fat they need, with plenty of fruit in season. His main thesis is that we need more meat, fats, and eggs, i.e., more of the rationed foods and less starch. The official figures showing that, in fact, we are healthier than we were before the war convey a false impression. First, this is a quite extraordinary argument, because health and nutrition were admittedly in a bad way before the war, so that the present improvement is nothing to write home about. Secondly, because the drop in the death rate merely means a greater expectation of existence, and one must not confuse existence with life. Unless we can attain liveliness, vitality, vigor, for which meat, fat, fruit, and cane sugar are required, we cannot make the effort needed for the task of reconstruction. Sir Philip ends his article. As for those who would cut our present ration further so as to give more to the Germans, there must be many who would reply to their demands. I would sooner that my children, brought up in freedom and goodwill towards men, should enjoy full vigor than that Germans, who may be using their strength to make war on the world again in another generation. It will be seen that he is assuming A. that any further export of food means a cut in rations here, and B. that it is only proposed to send food to Germany. And, in fact, that is the main form in which the big public has heard of this project, although those responsible have emphasized from the start that they were only proposing a voluntary surrender of certain foodstuffs by those sections of the population to whom it would do no harm, and were not proposing it for the sole benefit of Germany. Now, here are a few facts from the latest bulletin of the Save Europe Now committee. In Budapest, in November, the chemists were closing down for lack of supplies. The hospitals had neither windows, fuel, nor anesthetics, and it was calculated that the town contained 30,000 stray children, some of whom had formed themselves into criminal bands. In December, independent observers considered that unless fresh food supplies were brought quickly, 1 million people would die of starvation in Hungary this winter. In Vienna, November, the food for hospital surgeons consists of unsweetened coffee, a very thin soup, and bread. Less than 500 calories in all, while the Austrian Secretary of State, in December, described the thickly populated areas of eastern Austria as being menaced by boundless misery, epidemics, crime, physical and moral decline. In Czechoslovakia, in November, the foreign minister appealed to Britain and the USA to send fats and meat to save 700,000 very badly fed children of whom 50% already have tuberculosis. In Germany, the Saar children are slowly starving. In the British zone, Field Marshal Montgomery said that he was entirely dependent on imports of wheat if he was to maintain the present ration scales for the German people, ranging from 1,200 to 1,500 calories. This was in November. About the same time, General Eisenhower, speaking of the French zone, said that the normal ration of 1,100 calories a day for the average consumer was consistently not met. And so on. Meanwhile, it appears that our own average consumption is about 2,800 or 2,900 calories a day, while the most recent figures of deaths from tuberculosis and of deaths of mothers in childbirth and of children of all ages up to 5 are the lowest ever recorded. As for the USA, consumption of butter has just risen largely and meat rationing has come to an end. The Secretary of Agriculture estimates that the lifting of rationing will make meat available for civilians at the rate of 165 pounds annually. The pre-war supply was in the neighborhood of 125 pounds. Even if the above figures do not convey much impression, who has not seen the photographs of skeleton-like children in Greece and other places, children to whom no one would think of applying Sir Philip Joubert's term, suety? Yet there has undoubtedly been considerable resistance to the idea that we should send more food to Europe. The Save Europe Now committee, though they are now pursuing more limited aims, started off with the suggestion that those who felt inclined should sacrifice their points, or some of their points, and that the government should forward the food so saved to the famine-stricken areas. The scheme was discouraged officially, but it also had a cold reception from many private persons. People who would have been in a position to give it good publicity were frankly frightened of it, and the general public was allowed to imagine that what was proposed was to take food from British housewives in order to give it to German war criminals. Indeed, the whole manner in which this business has been discussed illustrates the curious dishonesty that infects every political issue nowadays. There are two things that make what one might call the official left, Labour or Communist, nervous of any scheme which might mean sending extra food to Germany. One is fear of the working class reaction. The working classes, so it is said, would resent even a voluntary arrangement which meant, in effect, that people in the higher income groups who buy unrationed foods and eat some of their meals in restaurants should give up their surplus. The average woman in the fish queue, it is feared, would answer, "If there's really any food to spare, let us have it." Or why not give it to the coal miners? I don't know whether this would really be the reaction, if the issues were fully explained. I suspect that some of the people who argue thus have in mind the sordid consideration that if we are to sacrifice food in sufficient quantities to make any difference, it would mean not merely giving up points, but curtailing restaurant feeding. In practice, whatever it may be in intention, our rationing system is thoroughly undemocratic, and an all-round row on the subject of this export of food might draw attention to this fact. That is part of the reason, I think, why this question has not been fully discussed in print. But another consideration, even less mentionable, also enters. Food is a political weapon, or is thought of as a political weapon. The hungriest areas are either in the Russian zone or in the parts of Europe that are divided between the USSR and the Western Allies. Many people calculate that if we send more food to, say, Hungary, British or American influence in Hungary will increase. Whereas, if we let the Hungarians starve and the Russians feed them, they are more likely to look towards the USSR. All those who are strongly Russophile are therefore against sending extra food to Europe, while some people are probably in favor of sending food merely because they see it as a way of weakening Russian prestige. No one has been honest enough to avow such motives, but you have only to look through the lists of those who have, and of those who haven't, supported the Save Europe Now campaign to see how the land lies. The folly of all such calculations lies in supposing that you can ever get good results from starvation. Whatever the ultimate political settlement in Europe may be, it can only be worse if it has been preceded by years of hunger, misery, banditry, and ignorance. Air Marshal Joubert advises us to feed ourselves rather than feed German children who will be fighting against us a generation hence. This is the realistic view. In 1918, the realistic ones were also in favor of keeping up the blockade after the armistice. We did keep up the blockade, and the children we starved then were the young men who were bombing us in 1940. No one, perhaps, could have foreseen just that result, but people of goodwill could and did foresee that the results of wantonly starving Germany and of making a vindictive peace would be evil. So also with raising our own rations, as we shall perhaps be doing before long, while famine descends on Europe. But if we do decide to do this, at least let the issues be plainly discussed, and let the photographs of starving children be well publicized in the press, so that the people of this country may realize just what they are doing.